I value truth. I want to believe as many true things as possible, and I want to believe as few false things as possible. I want to find out I'm wrong as often as possible, and I want to constantly double-check that which I think I'm right about. Today, we bring you a quest for truth about vaccines.
From Acapulco, Mexico, this is Anarchast.
Greetings, white blood cells. Welcome to Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I will be Patrick Smith. Today, we bring you something special. Possibly a first in the history of the internet, a calm, rational, friendly debate seeking to find truth about vaccinations. Most debates out there on just about any topic are ridiculous. They are near worthless. They are mostly waste of time, meant to just be like, cockfights where it's just a blood sport where people just enjoy, seeing each other tear each other to pieces. But you don't actually learn much. You don't actually get anywhere. Most people just kind of confirm their biases, close the video, and move on. I hate that. I never want to do that. And so that's not what we're going to do today. We're not going to fight. We're not going to bicker, insult. The format is not going to be so rigid, like everybody's got 60-second time slices. We're not going to do that. We have a different format. The moderator usually has no concept of how to do his job. We're going to do it different. We're going to do it better. But before we get started, let me introduce our guests today and our debaters. We have with us Danny Panzella. He is a filmmaker and activist from New York City. He is currently shooting a documentary on cannabis and cancer and is the founder of sovereigninthecity.com. Welcome to the show, sir. Yep, let me unmute the mics. Welcome to the show, sir. I knew I would do that. I knew it. I even told you guys before the show started, if I mute your mics, I'm going to forget to unmute them. Welcome to the show.
Yes, you did. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Very cool. We also have with us Isaac Lindenberger. He's a psychedelic researcher from Ohio. He is working on legalizing mind-altering substances and exploring the inner landscape with a scientific methodology. He also runs the Lucid Truth podcast, which can be found at thelucidtruth.com. Welcome to the show, sir.
Great to be here.
Awesome. Okay, so why is this and how is this debate going to be different from all the ones that you've seen previously? Well, let's actually talk through that. And if you look down in the description, one of the first links you'll see is a link to Patrick's debate method. Now, this is something that I've developed over time to try and improve this impossible debate situation we have online. You can click it, you can read the whole thing. I'm not going to go through the entire thing up front. Everyone in this discussion on this side of the screen has read it, has agreed to it, and we've talked through it, and they're familiar with it. For your purposes, I will just give you a quick overview. The main things is that we have an agreement on what constitutes truth. Truth is that which is logically consistent, which means it conforms to the rules of reason, and congruent with the evidence, which means it conforms to reality. All three of our goals here today is not to have a cockfight. Our goals are threefold. All three must be served at all times, and it's my job as the moderator to make sure it happens. We are partners in a search for truth. Audience education and understanding is our goal, so we are serving you guys right now. We're not fighting each other. We're trying to help all three of us as well as you guys. And we have to make sure that our discourse here today conforms to the rules of reason, which is logic, and evidence, which are facts. This is going to be a back and forth conversational style of discussion. This is not going to be a rigid, you get 60 seconds. Oh, you're going over time. I'm going to bitch at you. No, we're not doing that. This is a conversation today. I, as the moderator, will probably be the only one that might interrupt frequently. My job is to represent you guys, the audience. I will embody you as much as I can in this debate. And what that means is I'm gonna be shit testing both sides. When I detect BS, I'm gonna call them on it. When I detect bad arguments, I'm gonna call them on it. I'm gonna take your questions, guys. If you'd like to, we have super chats available here. Let me duck. I'm not usually at the top of the screen, but I figured I would, be the overlord in this anarchist discussion and look down upon the plebs. if you'd like to support the show as well as submit questions, that's the address you can do it. If you use YouTube's Super Chat, you are giving Google 30%, and I'm pretty sure you guys don't want to do that. So, thank you. My producer is watching the comments. We will be taking questions from you. My producer is watching. He'll be sending me the really good, juicy questions via a separate chat because I will not be able to watch everything that goes by during the debate. Thank you to my producer, Kaysen, for doing that. I have an expectation on all three of us here on this side of the screen that we are going to be reasonable, rational, polite. We are going to assume the best of all three of us. We are all here. We are all good people. We are all on a quest for truth, and we want good things. We want voluntary interactions. All three of us are anarchists. I'm not sure that we all particularly use the adjective or the label voluntarist, but the core fundamental principles are there. Guys, you're welcome to correct me if I'm wrong, of course. I feel like I'm on the Brady Bunch, intro where I'm like, I can look down at you guys. So, and I want you guys in the audience to do the same. If you're not here looking for truth, if you're not here hoping to be wrong, this is probably not the show for you. I am hoping to be wrong. I'm hoping to learn something, and I hope that our participants do as well. Please, I expect no one on this side of the screen to insult or to talk down about or to be toxic. We are going to have that same expectation on our audience because we are hosting you on the video here for a purpose, because the audience is going to have some good things to say. But if it becomes toxic, my producer will be hiding people. And unfortunately, we don't really have a mechanism to ever unhide you. So if you ever want to participate on this channel, again, don't get hidden today is what I'm trying to say. And I'm, them are the rules. Them are the rules. I don't know what else to say. So let's be nice. We're all good people. We're all anarchists. That's the another point that I wanted to make. Okay. The other unique thing about this particular debate format is preparation, something I call discovery. This is the same thing you'll see people do in courtrooms before they try and mitigate justice, when they try and determine right and wrong in a situation. Well, that's kind of exactly what we're doing here. We're trying to determine the truth of the situation. So we have a discovery phase. Now, both participants were given, about a week to list out, create a document with a bulleted or numbered list of the sources that they intend to cite today. This is something different. Most debates are not like this. Most debates online, they're like, oh, well, yeah, such and such a study says this, therefore I'm right. And the other guy's like, well, I've never seen that. I guess I'll have to review it and get back to you later. Unfortunately, the audience doesn't see that. You never get to see them get back to the guy later. It's not how the online debates work. Today, we're changing that. We have done discovery. Both sides created and provided documents to the other in advance so that they can both be aware of the evidence and the actual factual evidence that they're going to be referencing and deferring to today in this discussion. And so they've both had time to prepare defenses and opposition to both sides. There's a link in the description to the full document where you can see the discovery for both people. I think it's on GitHub right now. There's a link in the description. You can literally follow along in this debate. So when one of the people says, takes a position or makes a point, they're going to be able to say, look at my discovery, number 3. And everybody in the audience will, for the first time in the history of internet debates, be able to follow along and look at this stuff as we talk about it. So that's another important differentiator that we're going to do differently here today. All right, guys. So we had a coin toss sort of a thing earlier where we actually we should talk about the proposition at hand first. So the last thing I'll talk about that differentiates this debate from all other debates is having rigorous rules or standards for the proposition to be debated. A lot of debates waste a lot of time by making some sort of proposition that is just kind of unprovable, or that is subjective, or that comes down to somebody's opinion. That's a waste of time. The proposition that all participants here have agreed on today is one that can be disproven. If your positions, and this goes for any of us, all of us, I would really suggest, definitely for me, if I have a position and there is nothing that I can find, there is no method I can find that will lower my confidence that that position is true, then I am at risk of believing something that is not true. Make sure that your beliefs include something, some mechanism, some method out there that is possible that would allow you to falsify your positions. That's a constant struggle for me, and that goes for our proposition today. Because without a method of disproving something, you cannot know that a thing is actually true. And so for that reason, the proposition that we will be debating today is, do the risks of vaccines outweigh the benefits for most people? And the reason why that we're stating the proposition up front is because my job as the moderator representing the audience, y'all's time is precious. You're giving us the benefit of your time. I really appreciate that. You guys are awesome. And to respect your time, my job as your representative will be to make sure we stay on track towards finding the truth of this specific proposition. Do the risks of vaccines outweigh the benefits for most people? That's an empirical statement that we will be debating. Now, Isaac will be taking the position that the risks of vaccines do not outweigh the benefits for most people, and Danny will be taking the opposing position that the risks of vaccines do outweigh the benefits for most people. So, the last thing I'll say, and I think I've said the last thing I'll say 5 times, but this is the last, I promise, is that I want to thank these 2 participants. They are here standing up for what they believe in. And for that, whether or not you agree or disagree with either one of them or me or anybody else, they deserve respect for actually standing up for what they believe in. They deserve respect for having the fortitude to show up out from behind keyboards to join us in the fight for finding truth, getting off social media and actually interacting with one another. That deserves respect. They deserve respect for meeting and agreeing to a set of rules for this discussion. That also doesn't happen frequently. And for diligently taking time to compile and share their resources and to make sure that they were prepared, as well as making sure they put an effort to help their opponent be more prepared to oppose them in this discussion. That deserves respect. Mad props for that. And then, of course, the biggest amount of respect is for being consistent anarchists, I would say voluntarists, in that that both people here today refuse to advocate the initiation of force, or in specific, as to the specific proposition the subject that we're talking about here today. No one on the screen here in front of you here today advocates forced vaccinations. That is an unanarchistic position. To say that you have the right to force somebody to be vaccinated is to say that you are their ruler, and that is not an anarchist debate. That will not happen on this platform. I will be happy to debate somebody that holds that position, but we'd probably do it on my other channel called Disenthrall. This is Anarchast. We have anarchists here, and we like to have anarchistic discussions here. And so no one on this screen will be taking that position. Like I said, the proposition is that do the risks of vaccines outweigh the benefits for most people. Now I'm actually done. So, Danny gets first crack with his introduction. I will pitch it to you, Danny. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And, I just want to echo everything that you said. The reason I agreed to do this debate is because Isaac is a gentleman, and we disagree on a lot, but we have always kept our debates on Facebook very civil. And I appreciate that about him, because this is a very emotional issue. Somebody in the comments before mentioned that both sides kind of think that the other is responsible for people dying, and so that's why it gets so emotionally charged. So I appreciate Isaac and his willingness to keep everything civil, and of course I also appreciate his consistent anarchist philosophy that he doesn't believe in forced vaccines. Just a little bit about myself and how I came to be anti-vaccine, or really I guess I really am. I think the science is flawed. I think conceptually the science is flawed, and we'll get into that. About 10 years ago, my mother had breast cancer, and she was going through chemo. And this was right at the time that the 2008 financial crisis was happening. So I was a real estate investor. I don't really practice anymore, but I took a major financial hit in the crisis, and my mother passed away from cancer right after the crisis. So in my research, both about economics and about trying to find alternative therapies for my mom, because I could just see that the chemo was draining her life, I ran into Ron Paul, both in the Fed movement and the health freedom movement. And that's what kind of started me both on my journey into libertarianism and then anarchy and voluntarism, and also into researching pharmaceuticals and just kind of this science that's behind it. Before that, I had a very, mainstream pro-vax view. I thought that vaccines were a legitimate product and that they probably did benefit. So I became an anti-vaxxer because I started to do that research and really look into immunology and how the body works. So that's really how I came to be a pro-vaccine choice or a pro-holistic medicine advocate. And that's carried over into my work with my documentary about cannabis and cancer. That research I also stumbled onto while researching alternatives for my mom. So I was convinced by the research that I've, and some of it that I'll share. And that's what changed my mind on vaccines.
Okay, awesome. Isaac, I will give it to you for your introduction.
Awesome. Thank you. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here as well. I am glad to be debating Danny because I support his position on psychedelics a lot. He was just on TV to advocate for them for therapy, and mad respect for that. That was amazing. So we kind of work on some similar things together when it relates to that field, but I'm excited for this conversation. And the way that I got into vaccines is kind of crazy. My brother got vaccinated against my mom's wishes. My mom's anti-vax. And it kind of blew up. Like it became like this big story. And so then I'm brought into it and everyone's like, well, what do you think about vaccines? And I'm like, well, I don't really know. I don't know a lot about vaccines. So I was already in the liberty movement at this time. So it's like, okay, I'll just default and say, you should be able to choose. That will be my standard position because I already believe in freedom. So I went on the high wire. I met Del Bigtree. I met people like Larry Cook, a lot of people in the anti-vaccine movement. And I really listened to what they were saying because I didn't know much about vaccines. And these people are telling me things that are very intelligent, coherent, and they make a lot of sense. Creates a whole consistent worldview that backs itself up. So I've really heard the anti-vaccine argument and the things that they believe. And looking into it more, I think the science supports vaccines in general for the most part, but I also still think it should be individual choice. So I want to encourage people to vaccinate voluntarily because it seems like for the individual, the benefits outweigh the risks when it comes to both on a societal level and for the individual who gets vaccinated. So that's my current understanding. And I feel like since I've investigated the whole anti-vaccine sentiment pretty in depth, I feel pretty qualified to discuss it. So this is all kind of my framework based on my experience, and I'm excited to share it with someone who's open to having a constructive dialogue because a lot of it is toxic. It's us versus them a lot of times, and we don't need an us versus them mentality. We need to work on this together and cooperate and have a discussion that's more balanced. And then that's a good way to find truth, I think.
Awesome. Okay, so I want to kick off the conversation phase of the debate by kind of going back to something, question to both of you. And this goes to falsifiability of the proposition, what piece of evidence, what mechanism, what process, and I'll give this to Danny first, would reduce your confidence that your position is the correct position?
What would reduce my confidence in my position?
Yeah, like if it were possible to reduce your confidence in your position, what mechanism would it be? Like what kind of evidence would it take to reduce your confidence that you have the correct position?
I think that I would be a lot more open to research that is privately funded, not funded by vaccine companies or pharmaceutical companies that would profit from the research, whereas that profit motive could, cause a confirmation bias result in the research itself. If there were third-party studies that were really studying this, unfortunately, 90% of studies are funded by government and or pharmaceutical companies. So I have a healthy distrust of the results of those, especially in light of my more holistic view of medicine. So I think if there were more independent, third-party, disinterested studies, I think that would be more convincing to me.
Okay, same question to you, Isaac. What evidence or what process could be used to disprove you or to lower your confidence that you're correct?
Well, evidence in general that is actually scientifically consistent and accurate. So I don't like to bring the heuristic of the belief of my worldview into assessing an individual truth claim. So if an individual topic about vaccines, let's say you want to talk about mandates, or you want to talk about funding, or you want to talk about ingredients, I'm open to those conversations as long as they're balanced with the benefits that vaccines offer. So there are individualized points that do hold merit and could be true. So I feel like it's better to take the approach for each specific argument in its own. And if a specific argument is good, substantial, and provided with evidence, then I would adopt it into my position.
Okay, so the secret of what we just did was tell the other person what needs to be done in this discussion to win the debate, for lack of a better term. So he's looking, Danny is looking for sources of information that maybe aren't biased financially or possess a conflict of interest by some method. And it sounds like you're just looking for a good, solid set of studies that have good methodology that would indicate that vaccines are dangerous enough to not be recommendable to the average person. Do either of you disagree with my assessments of your positions?
No, I think that's good.
That's good.
Awesome. Guys, do you see what's happening? This is how it should work. Okay. The next thing I want to do before I kind of let you guys go back and forth is state your epistemology. And what that means is tell us the process, and we'll start with you, Isaac. Tell us the process that you used to arrive at your position that vaccines are not too risky for most people.
Well, I actively try to be aware of my heuristic bias. So like the way that you interpret the world is based on information that you've previously experienced. And so instead of trying to integrate things that I learn into my pre-existing value system and worldview, instead what I try to do is objectively analyze new evidence on the basis of its individual merit. And if a certain amount of evidence for a truth claim holds up, then I believe it. And if not, I don't. And I try to leave behind any predispositions or any biases that would make me think, oh, I'm already pro-vaccine or I'm already anti-vaccine. Because too many people read a study and they decide what they're going to learn from it before reading it. If you're anti-vaccine, you might say, oh, well, where's the anti-vaccine truth in this? Or if you're pro-vaccine even, well, where's the pro-vaccine truth in this? And that prevents you from being able to objectively analyze what truth exists in what you're hearing. So I try to prevent that and integrate, just an objective framework.
All right. Danny, same question to you, and then we'll let you guys kind of start in on each other, so to speak. What was your process for arriving at your position?
I used to have a friend who was anti-vaccine, and we used to argue all the time. And it could get pretty heated. He was a close friend, so it wasn't nasty, but the debates were pretty heated. And I used to make a lot of the same arguments that now I'm arguing against. So I think it was really just slowly. It wasn't like an instantaneous thing. I didn't watch one documentary and decide, oh, yeah, I've just changed my whole worldview. I think I built this belief system. And I do admit that it's a belief system because I don't believe there really is any empirical evidence. I do have a bias towards nature. I trust nature over government and corporations, crony capitalism, essentially, which the whole industry, including the research, you can't separate it. It's intimately intertwined. So yeah, I absolutely have a bias towards nature and really nutrition. So, I think this was kind of slowly built over time, and I think it would probably take some pretty stark research to really change my mind, honestly. And again, as I mentioned before, meeting that kind of threshold of a disinterested third party.
Okay, so Isaac, why do you think that the risks of vaccines do not outweigh the benefits for most people?
Well, the risks of infectious diseases are simply greater than the risk of damage from a vaccine. So let's take let's take measles, for example. The rates of encephalitis, which is brain swelling, it's 1 in 3 in 1,000 infants who are infected with measles. Well, that compares to 1 in a million from immunization. So the rates of brain swelling that could potentially lead to death, and I think 10% of cases of encephalitis, way higher than you would get from natural immunity. Natural immunity is better, right? It works for longer periods of time and it's more effective. But the risk of natural immunity is death, and it's not worth it. The risks of death from vaccinations are far, far less severe. So I'm not going to say that adverse events with vaccines don't happen, because a lot of people on the pro-vaccine side say, vaccine adverse events aren't real. If you think you were harmed by vaccines, you're just misguided. And that's not true. Adverse events do occur, and they occur in predictable rates. But the rates of adverse events are far lower than the previously devastating impact of infectious diseases. So that's why I think vaccination is better on an individual level and a collective level, both simultaneously. It's not one or the other. So at least that's what the evidence supports.
All right. Danny, why do you disagree with that?
Well, I think that Isaac did a great job making my point for me. Vaccines require booster shots. The science, looking through Isaac's document of sources, all the studies he provided, or some of the studies he provided, openly admit that not only do the vaccines have side effects, and sometimes dangerous side effects, but the immunity is not as, it doesn't last as long. That's requiring booster shots. Now, how many adults are going out and getting their booster shots? I don't know what the statistics are on that. Maybe I should have looked that up, but I'm going to venture to say it's probably pretty low. I have not had any booster shots. Now, I was vaccinated as a child, but I haven't. I don't know that very many of my friends have argued, and even people that argue that are pro-vax, they really just want to vaccinate children, because I don't think many of them have their boosters themselves. But wild immunity or natural immunity, coming in contact with a pathogen and your body developing the immunity to it, is a lifelong, in most cases. Even mainstream science admits that it creates lifelong immunity. So I think what we kind of have here is this false security blanket of a temporary immunity. And yeah, I will agree that the adverse reactions, most people don't die from vaccines. Many people do die from vaccines. The CDC reports that 40 deaths per year from the MMR alone. And the CDC also admits, and this should be in the document, that the reporting of the VAERS system, which is where they get these statistics from, is very low. They actually say that the VAERS statistics are 1% of what is probably the actual statistic. So if 40 deaths per year from MMR is the annual statistic, and that's only 1%, that's a lot of deaths. So, again, the politics absolutely on both sides enter into these statistics. But I think the fact that wild immunity, it creates lifelong immunity, it's natural, it's the way we evolved. A personal belief of mine is that I don't think that we evolved to inject ourselves with a cocktail of petroleum-based chemicals, adjuvants, preservatives. These are things that have not really been studied. As a matter of fact, another study that's in my disclosure documents is a study where the scientists are lamenting. They admit that the currently used adjuvants are not really that safe, and that they wish that there was more money being spent on studies to find better adjuvants because of the injuries that are caused by these adjuvants, and a lot of the unknown side effects that come from them.
So Isaac, it's more natural. I mean, to be fair, death is also natural, but that's not cool, right? So
Right.
Isaac, what do you have to say about that?
Well, okay, so natural immunity is better. Like, I did make that point, but it comes at the risk of death and serious adverse events, even from the diseases themselves. Like, measles might not kill you, but encephalitis is not something that you want to deal with. So I'm glad you brought up VAERS, because VAERS, for those who don't know, is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. And it is a database that's used to catch rare adverse reactions after they occur within the population. So Danny mentioned that only 1% of side effects are reported to VAERS. While that is true, you have to think about what kind of side effects are being reported. So minor injuries like rashes are underreported, because why are you going to report a small rash after a vaccine? There's no real reason to. But major adverse events like death are overreported. So the adverse effects of vaccines when it comes to serious debilitating effects, those are overreported. There's more of them than actually occur in the system. And if you look at VAERS cases, there's statistically a 3% connection between a VAERS claim and a vaccine correlation. So not only are there more cases, there's a lower threshold of correlation between the cases that are in there. So it really doesn't make it look great for the serious adverse events that are reported within the system. So the 40 deaths might be true. It's kind of a low number when you think about millions of MMR injections over time. Also, MMR isn't a great example for lifelong immunity, because MMR, it's one round and you're good for life. So other vaccines require more consistent boosters. Sometimes they only last 10 years. MMR lasts about a lifetime. So it's pretty close compared to natural immunity with far lower risks. But yeah, I feel like it's important to note that it's only the minor injuries that are underreported when it comes to VAERS cases.
Well, what you're asking parents to do is risk that their child is the 1 in 40. I'm not sure how you come to the conclusion that the 40 deaths is overreported. If the CDC is saying this is only 1% of what they believe is actual cases, I mean, we've all heard, and look, I get that this is anecdotal, but when you have tens of thousands of parents all reporting the same events, right? Their child has a seizure within 48 hours of getting the MMR, and then develops encephalitis and dies, or regresses into autism-like symptoms. Now, I'm not saying, I do not believe that autism necessarily cause, vaccines necessarily cause autism. I don't believe that. I think that there probably are genetic predispositions. I think that there are chemicals in vaccines that maybe for some people could cause allergic reactions. I do think Dr. Wakefield's work, regardless of the political assassination that happened 10 years after his study was peer-reviewed and on the books for 10 years, then vaccine sales drop, and then all of a sudden they politically assassinate him. I think that his study never said vaccines cause autism, but he did find a link between leaky gut syndrome and autism, and leaky gut syndrome and adjuvants in vaccines. So do I think there's a link? I think there probably is a link. I don't think that it's, tens of thousands of parents reporting the same exact, I don't think they're all making it up. But then you've got doctors saying, no, that's not true. That's been debunked. This child didn't die from the vaccine, and they report cause of death as something else. I mean, we know that cause of deaths, especially in the aggregate, are politically motivated. Look at what's happening right now with COVID. Dr. Burks is getting on TV and openly saying, yeah, if you believe it was COVID, mark it as COVID, right? As cause of death. I mean, I don't know if they're going to be so bold, but if somebody dies of a car accident and then they test them, they test the corpse and the corpse has COVID, are they going to mark that as a COVID death? But look, we know that this type of stuff happens. Politics affects this type of reporting. I don't think you would argue with that, right?
No, of course not. And actually, what you're talking about, the deaths related, like let's say someone dies of something like a car accident, they have COVID, and it's marked as COVID death, right? That's one of the problems with the vaccine insert. People cite the vaccine insert and they say, oh, look, this insert shows that the vaccine is dangerous. Well, my favorite part of the insert is where it says without regards to causality. There's inserts that say gunshot wounds could occur and car crashes and drowning. I don't think a vaccine is going to cause a gunshot wound, but that occurred in the clinical sample, so it has to be in there. So that exact problem with COVID is why you can't use a vaccine insert to believe that vaccines cause traumatic harm. And I agree with you. Vaccines are not related to autism based off of the evidence. There is some suggestive evidence that about 1 in a million vaccines could result in death after vaccination. I think I supplied that in my discovery. So it's definitely possible. And the parents aren't making everything up. Some of it does occur. Vaccine adverse events happen. But what proportion do they happen? And at what proportion of those adverse events do they outweigh the dramatic benefit that vaccines offer in terms of preventing disease? That's the real question.
That is the real question of the debate. It's so I appreciate that you've acknowledged the very real fact that vaccines do cause damage. I think that's an important bracket for your side of this discussion. Like we know where the line of reality is. Right. I mean, how is a person supposed to make that judgment call for themselves? Like, given that 1 in a million they will die, how would you ask somebody to do that?
Well, you have to think about if 1 in a million people die from a vaccine, but 1 in 10,000 die from measles concurrent encephalitis infection. Well, you're way more likely to die if you leave yourself vulnerable to a preventable disease. So my argument is that these diseases, like measles, like pertussis, they are dangerous. They come back when people decide not to vaccinate. And vaccines are a victim of their own success. They've worked so well that we think, oh, these diseases aren't a problem anymore. They're all gone. I don't see them. So we think, oh, well, we must not need vaccines because they're not a salient threat. These diseases aren't within our collective consciousness because they're not around, because immunizations have done so well that we don't think we need them anymore. And immunizations the rates will go back up if people don't vaccinate and measles comes back and starts affecting families and neighborhoods. And I don't want that to happen.
Sorry, Danny, one more interruption. Sorry. It seems like you just equated chance of vaccine injury to chance of death with a disease, but there's a chance in between the two, which is your chance of getting the disease and then your chance of dying from the disease. So is there a statistic that adds those two together so that we can compare sort of apples to apples in that way? Sorry to keep interrupting, Danny.
No, that's fine.
I figure I'm helping you, so you'd be okay with it.
So can you please repeat the question what are you asking for?
So there is a given rate of vaccine injury for a given vaccine, for any given vaccine, right? And then there is a given rate of injury or death from any given disease. But I don't think you can compare apples to apples with those two rates because not everybody gets the disease that then has a chance of being injured by it. So can we add together the chance of getting the disease if you don't get vaccinated to the statistic of disease injury? That way we can compare disease injury over the population to vaccine injury over the population. Does that make sense?
Yes, and it would be possible if these diseases weren't environmentally important. So like it's something that's variable. It depends on if the disease is in your community. If measles is ravaging your unvaccinated community, then you know the risks are way higher than if you don't vaccinate in a community that has herd immunity, where the disease is not likely to spread and there's no cases of measles. So this is all depending on where you live, the immunization rates, the level of herd immunity, the disease in question. So there's too many compounding variables to be able to make a generalized assessment overall, other than the fact that for the general population and for individuals themselves, vaccinating is one of the best things you can do to ensure your long-term health, because we have seen these diseases come back, especially when vaccine trust starts to disintegrate in communities, which is also supported by forced vaccines. When you support a forced vaccine, it lowers the trust in the vaccine system unless people get vaccinated. Well, what do you think? You're telling someone that this product isn't good enough to work on its own in the free market, and that's not very trustworthy.
I think what you're missing is you're making this assumption that if people get the measles, they're going to die. But that's not really the fact. Most people get measles, get over it, and move on with their lives, and then have lifetime natural immunity. There are some people that are succumb to measles, but generally speaking, statistically, they have other health problems, and the measles may be the straw that broke the camel's back, but it's really a secondary cause of the death. Whatever immune deficiency or other illness is really the main cause. We just had an outbreak here last summer. They made a big deal about it. They had martial law. They banned people from going out in public in some counties in New York City because there was a measles outbreak. And I'm trying to find the exact statistics so that I can give those to you. But something like 1,000 people had measles, and one infant that had some, another, I don't remember exactly what the situation was, but one infant passed away. So we're not talking about a deadly disease, but look, there are deadly infectious diseases out there. We vaccinate for about 60 diseases. There are about 300 plus deadly infectious diseases that we know of that we don't vaccinate for. Are we living in fear of those diseases every day? Are we on lockdown quarantine constantly because do we live our lives that way because we're afraid of these diseases we don't have vaccinations for? No. And I think there's another alternative to vaccines, and that is making sure that your immune system is working correctly. Homeostasis is the best way to get your immune system to be functioning at optimal levels so that it can deal with these problems the way nature intended it to. And, I hesitate to say this because I feel like it may be taken the wrong way, but I think it is a harsh reality, and it is a truth that part of evolution is weeding out. Look, I know people that have passed away from diseases, but unfortunately, nature does remove people. People do get selected for extinction because of, genetic weaknesses that could present themselves as immune deficiency. I know it sounds like a really callous thing to say. I'm a very compassionate person, at least I try to be. And I don't want anybody to die. I want everybody to eat the best way they can, to take care of their bodies the best way that they can, so that they can maintain homeostasis and their immune system will be the strongest it can be and fight off these diseases so that we can be a healthy society. I think that's the real way to achieve a healthy society. I think vaccines are like a stopgap measure that our rulers came up with, for lack of a better term, because people are too stupid to take care of themselves, or people refuse to take care of themselves. So we have to force them to take care of themselves by injecting them with, these products. And we cannot lose sight of the fact that they are, in fact, consumer products. Vaccines are not magical unicorn milk that are, perfect. The studies you provided in your discovery list the side effects. They are dangerous. They are not as effective as wild natural immunity. So I think what we've kind of done is created a society of people that no longer have strong immune systems. We rely on this essentially synthetic life support. And I think that applies to the broader allopathic kind of medicine in general. We don't talk about, I have not heard anything on the news about boosting your immune system. They have mentioned vitamin C to some degree, but Facebook was marking articles about using elderberry and other vitamins other fruits, basically fruit-based vitamins, to boost your immune system. They're marking it as fake news. This is kind of the world we live in. In some of the online commentary, people were making snarky comments like, oh, well, if you don't get vaccinated, what are you going to do? Use essential oils? But essential oils are the natural components of the plants that nourish our bodies, boost our immune systems, and it's the same essential oils the pharmaceutical companies are using to isolate compounds, synthesize them, and then mass produce them. So ultimately, you could say colloquially that vaccines are made from essential oils in some sense, right? So I think why do we need a vaccine? Why do we need a pharmaceutical product when we can focus on nutrition and boost our immune systems the natural way and give ourselves the best evolutionary chance of survival?
Okay, so I appreciate that. It seems like both of you, and again, please correct me if I get this wrong. It seems like both of you have bracketed your sides of this discussion in a very rational, evidence-based location. Like, one side has admitted that vaccines do cause damage. The other side has admitted that vaccines are efficacious. They do provide some sort of, at least some level of prophylaxis against disease. Any disagreements with what I just said? I want to make sure I got it right.
Nope.
No.
Okay, so I like this. This is productive. Isaac, go ahead. You were typing quite a bit. I assume you got some stuff you want to say.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure I'm able to hit all of his points. So that was a good proposal, Danny. I think it doesn't need to be one way or the other. We can have boosted immune systems that are encouraging natural, homeopathic, real solutions to making sure we're better able to handle infections in the future, right? It doesn't, but we can supplement immunizations too. You can use immunizations and still try to be a healthy person. It's not like I get a vaccine and now I'm dependent on the allopathic medicine system. No, you can support both. I like CBD. I support it a lot, all kinds of natural plant medicines, but also natural isn't just better. Like cyanide's natural, right? And it's going to kill you. So I think it's not necessarily a great argument to say because this is natural, it's automatically more impressive. And the idea that measles is not dangerous is an illusion. Now, you are correct. The majority of people who get measles will not die. Most of them will live. But that doesn't mean that it's not dangerous still. Some people will die from measles. 1 in 3 in 1,000 kids develop encephalitis, 1 in a million from the vaccine compared to measles infection. So that's not a great statistic. It kills people way higher rate than the vaccine does. Not everyone who gets it, but that's not where you need to look for truth in. And yes, nutrition is great. I'm not going to speak out against something like nutrition, but nutrition doesn't produce antibodies. Nutrition does not show your immune system, this is a pathogen that can infect you and harm you. This is what to do if it comes around next time, which is what a vaccine does. So yes, you can have a boosted immune system, but if it has no recognition system for a novel virus that it hasn't been exposed to in the past, then great, you have a strong immune system that doesn't know what to do in the exposure of a deadly infection. So that's where immunizations come into play.
I want to correct you on the measles cases. In 2019, according to the CDC, from January 1st to December 31st, there were 1,282 individual cases of measles confirmed in 31 states. 73% of those cases were in New York. In the outbreaks in my neighborhood, actually just a few blocks away, where it was a large, there's a large Hasidic population that does not vaccinate, and there was quite a few people that caught measles, and there was not one death.
It's a small sample size.
2019, I'm sorry.
Right. So that wasn't 1,000 people.
100 people, no deaths from measles.
Right. 1 in 3 in 1,000 is the statistic. So if that's not 1,000 people, that's not a representative sample of the data.
Okay. I mean, it's 1,200. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'll agree that it's close enough. 128 people were hospitalized, and 61 people had pneumonia or encephalitis caused by the measles, and all of them recovered. Oh. FYI.
That's great. All of them recovered and there were no deaths. It's not always the case where people are so lucky, especially when you increase the level of outbreak. It's similar to COVID-19 where, yes, let's say the hospitals are in capacity to handle it, right? Then less people are going to die. But if no one was vaccinated, measles would be rampant right now. Hospitals wouldn't be able to handle it, and the death rate would increase. Similar to how the death rate in a place that can handle the hospital capacity is lower than one that's overburdened with their healthcare systems, which is something you have to take into consideration when it comes to highly infectious diseases, especially like measles, which has a rate of infection for every 1 person infected, 11 others are infected because it's airborne. That COVID-19 is like 3 people for every 1 infected. It's 11. It's so much more infectious.
Okay, before Danny responds to that, I want to do a couple of clerical things for the audience that are following along here. A couple things I'm seeing in chat. that I just want to say again for those that weren't here in the beginning of the stream. No one on the screen right now is advocating forced vaccinations. That is not an anarchist position. That is not happening in this debate on this channel. That is not part of the discussion. No one is advocating forced vaccinations. The second thing, I will remind the people that weren't here in the beginning, just so you know, if you call anybody on the screen names, if you call anybody else in the chat names, your comments will be permanently hidden on this channel. You will not be able to have your comments displayed or seen or participate in a discussion with us again. We are here trying to find truth together as good people, as friends, as compatriots in voluntarism and in anarchism. We are working together on this thing. So participate with us. If you have questions, put them in chat. If you have questions for me or the guests, put them in chat. My producer is watching chat. He will send them to me. If you would like to support the channel with a super chat with your question, you can definitely do that as well. Once again, here's the address for super chats. I'll leave it up here for a minute. All right. Sorry to interrupt, guys. Please continue.
No, you're good. I just wanted to bring up what. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that, because I did notice there were some nasty comments in the chat.
I have them blocked.
I know a lot of people, because of the attention your brother got and testifying before Congress, a lot of people think that, you were probably being paid. Look, I'm one of the biggest conspiracy theorists out there. So
yeah, I'm sure.
That type of stuff is rampant. I want to say to the audience, though, I've spent quite some time having discussions with Isaac on a few different topics in relation to this. I think he's a genuine guy. I don't think he's a paid pharma shill. It doesn't make sense. He's not advocating for forced vax. So, but no, I think he's a sincere guy that changed his mind, and that's fine. I also want to say that even though I think, for me, holistic medicine is better, I don't think it's wrong. I don't condemn or criticize those who do want to use vaccines. I think it's flawed. I think it's a fear-based mentality. Ultimately, I think it's an unintegrated fear of death. Without getting too Freudian about it, I think it's fear has a way of kind of making us want to look for that safety blanket. And I think you're right. Vaccines can be a safety blanket. And I don't necessarily believe that vaccines cannot provide immunity. For me, especially with regards to my son, I was not willing to take that risk that he would have been one of those 40 kids that dies a year from the MMR or has a serious side effect. For me, I would rather make sure that he's eating healthy, that he's exercising, that he's getting enough sun, that his immune system is strong, because I'd rather not risk those side effects. There's no testing for it, right? There's no allergy test to find out, is he allergic? Is he going to have a bad reaction to this? I wasn't going to risk my son. I understand people's argument, you're risking your kid's life by not vaccinating him. What if he gets polio and dies? Or what if he gets measles and dies? I don't want my son to die. I don't believe that he will. I have faith, I fully admit. And I think that it would do us all some justice to admit that a lot of this is really a faith-based belief. I have faith in nature. Others have faith in what's considered science or what's called science. I would argue it's crony capitalism that they're calling science. The same way they say that we're a capitalist country. We know that we're not a capitalist country. We know that this is not capitalism where a corporate entity is regulating our currency, right? So I agree that I think the same way we're not really capitalist, we can't really say when the government has its fingers in every bit of research and then the corporations that are profiting from that research, I think we can't make that argument that doesn't touch those things. There's no such thing as pure science. Even scientists have confirmation biases. So, I think there's very few people that I could say demonstrate integrity when it comes to the scientific method, right? Half the people that are commenting in the chat and even in the discussion we had yesterday on one of the threads, nobody was leaving anything open to say, well, the scientific method, if new information comes out, it's like, no, you're a moron if you don't believe in vaccines. I
Right.
don't. And that's not you. I know that's not you, and which is the reason why I'm even here. But I guess maybe that was a little bit of an emotional rant from me, some frustration.
Yeah, well,
cool.
thank you
Let
for
it out.
saying that.
Let it out.
I appreciate the sentiment because a lot of people do say those things about me, and it's hard because this has really affected my family. Like, it's completely divided my family. Like, my mom moved to Texas. She completely left Ohio because of this whole thing. So, there's a lot of unfortunate things that come with this topic, but I want to change the dialogue to make it less toxic, because everyone is respectful. Everyone cares. Not everyone's respectful, but everyone wants truth. Everyone thinks they're doing the best thing. They really believe in what they're doing, and they have goodwill. And I feel like that's something that needs to be taken into consideration, because a lot of people, they just don't see that. And I think that it's unfortunate. So I'm glad to have conversations like this, where we're changing the level of discourse, where we can actually respect alternate opinions and try to integrate them. So I definitely think that's good.
So I have sorry, go ahead. Let me.
I just want to mention one of the comments. Nick Tanzillo is saying that science is peer reviewed. Yeah, absolutely, it's peer reviewed, and peers are subject to the same political pressures, the same financial pressures. They want to get their studies done. They don't want to go against the mainstream. And a lot of times, the whistleblowers that come out, and the CDC has had whistleblowers coming out saying that CDC cooked data. Those whistleblowers are, look at Andrew Wakefield. He was stripped of his licenses. He can no longer practice. So when people speak out, these are the political ramifications. So that creates, that mitigates honest peer review and integrity in peer review. So, yeah, I think that consensus does not equal science necessarily. So just to respond to Nick's comment.
So let me give something to Isaac then. So we have a question from, actually I don't have the name who it's from. Maybe Gerard, I think. When was the last reported death associated with measles in the United States? This is, and let me package another one in there with that. So there's fallacious arguments on both sides, and I want to make sure that I prompt both of you with them. And I think this goes to one of them. So because there has been no deaths in a long time, why is that not a good argument against vaccinations, Isaac?
Okay, so, it's what I just said earlier. Vaccines are a victim of their own success. That actually attests for vaccines. There's been no measles deaths in the past few years in the United States. That's because of vaccines. So that means that they're working. That's why measles isn't around anymore. So that's not an argument to not vaccinate. It's actually the argument to continue vaccination so that that number stays at zero, so that we don't have a bunch of people.
Vaccine?
What'd you say?
Couldn't hear you.
Stats from before the measles vaccine was available, so we could see what the deaths were before that.
I was hoping that you would ask that and bring up that topic of conversation. So, real quick before I answer about what you were saying earlier, Danny, since I opposed forced vaccines, a lot of pro-vaccine advocates do not like me. They think I platform anti-vaxxers because I respect them enough to talk to them and listen to what they're saying because I'm not closed-minded. And they think that I support, since I don't want to force a vaccine down someone's throat, that I'm not a real scientist. And it's just a kind of bullshit. So I piss both sides off. That's for sure. So
freedom includes making bad decisions. So that's part and parcel of the anarchist position, for sure.
Yes, exactly. So sanitation and hygiene is usually the argument that people use to say that vaccines aren't important, because historically, this is Suzanne Humphrey, right? She wrote the book Dissolving Illusions, which is one of the most popular anti-vaccine books in the world. And what it says is sanitation and hygiene, you can look at the charts, all of the diseases that we vaccinate against were dropping in terms of their mortality rate before the vaccines were introduced.
Did you have that in your discovery? Can you tell people where to look in your discovery for that?
Yeah, that is vaccine...
Number 4.
That's at number 4, sanitation and hygiene, included with charts and references. So if you look here on the bottom graph, you can see the disease incident. You can see the mortality rate. And on that line right there, that's when the vaccine was introduced. So you see the vaccine introduction, you see deaths were already decreasing. So why did we need a vaccine, right? That's the argument Suzanne Humphrey makes, but this is only a half truth. And anti-vaxxers deal with this a lot. They will tell you a half truth, but then there's the other side of it that you're missing. So if you look at the top, this is disease incidence. And so the disease was still spreading up until the introduction of the vaccine. So you only have the reduction in disease concurrent with the introduction of the immunization, and you have to look at the disease incidence level and not the mortality rate. So this is true for polio. Look at 1955. Polio dropped after the vaccine. Look at HIV. Levels dropped in 1990. And look at pneumococcal. The levels of the disease incidence dropped in 2000. So all of these diseases dropped right after the vaccines are introduced, and separately, if it was sanitation and hygiene, they all would have decreased at the same time. So it wasn't sanitation and hygiene, it was immunization.
Isaac, the argument is that sanitation and hygiene increased our immune response to it because we didn't have other things taxing our immunity. So yeah, no one's saying that measles isn't going to continue to spread. The same way we're never going to stop the flu or the common cold from spreading. But when our immunity is high, we survive. We develop.
Not everyone survives.
So the mortality rate is the important statistic in that. And like you're showing it.
But people are still dying. That's not at zero. The mortality rate is not at zero until the introduction of the vaccine, which then it reaches zero.
In the third world, people are dying where there's no clean water, where they don't have proper nutrition. Yeah, people are dying in the third world. People are not dying in the United States of measles.
That's because we have a vaccine for it. And there's if the same rates of measles existed within the United States, even at the level of sanitation and hygiene that we currently possess, there would still be 1 in 3 in 1,000 rate of encephalitis compared to 1 in a million. And of those rates of encephalitis, some of them would result in death. So yes, some people would still die, not as many as before because of sanitation and hygiene. But the only thing that's going to eliminate death completely is immunization programs.
Nothing will ever eliminate death completely. Don't be so afraid of death.
Smallpox.
That you're trying to wipe it out where you can't. You cannot.
Smallpox. What about smallpox?
Nature finds a way to select people for extinction, as sad as that may be when it hits us on an individual level. No, seriously. It's a terrible tragedy when it's an individual in our lives that was selected for extinction. You know, my mother was selected for extinction. And it's a terrible thing. And it broke my heart. And it took me years to recover from that. But it's a fact of life. People are going to die. You're never going to stop death. And causing injuries to children that do survive. I mean, for me, my conscience, I can't do that. If you want to continue to vaccinate, or you've decided now you want to vaccinate. Now, actually, I have a question. Have you been vaccinated up to schedule now since you've turned from anti-vax to pro-vax?
Yeah, I actually got my vaccines for school, and based off all the anti-vax knowledge I'd had beforehand, I was actually a little concerned because, you know, even though I still believed in vaccines enough to get vaccinated, I had so much anti-vaccine information in me recently. I was like, I'm still kind of nervous, but, you know, I'm going to do it, and everything was fine. Everything was fine.
Well, because you're older now, so you're getting these doses, and you know you're not an infant getting all these doses in the first 18 months.
Well, infancy is a good time to get vaccinated because that's when you're most vulnerable to infectious diseases. So that's when you're most likely to die from an infection.
When you guys are both talking at the same time, we can't hear both of you. So just try and wait until the other one finishes before you start talking. Otherwise, we just literally can't hear you. So let me challenge Danny.
Bring it on.
So one of the most common things that I hear when I see these debates is a correlation is not causation fallacy. So I want to challenge you with this to see what you have to say. So they say that my son, daughter, mother, grandmother, I don't know, whatever. My family member, my close friend, their kid got vaccinated, and then 2 days later, a week later, they started showing signs of, you name it, autism to death. I don't know. So
yeah.
This is a fallacy of logic. It is correlation is not causation. Many things are correlated with one another, meaning that many things happen at the same time as other things, or they happen one right after the other, and that has has almost no bearing whatsoever on whether or not one caused the other. Can you talk about that and tell me what your position is on it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. I think that I think the whole vaccines cause autism movement became like kind of got out of control. If you read Wakefield's book, he's not anti-vax. I think what happens is we all know that the kind of hive mind, when the masses get a hold of something, they create a meme like vaccines cause autism, and then it becomes groupthink. And that's I would argue that's true of both the pro and the anti-vax side. And it's just true of society in general. So absolutely, there's definitely, I don't think it's necessarily, and that's why I say I don't believe vaccines cause autism necessarily. I think in some kids, there may be chemicals within it. I read an article today that argues that the glyphosate contained in it is what's causing the autism in some vaccines. So could it be that the vaccines are playing a part in triggering other, like Wakefield posits, leaky gut syndrome, and that leaky gut syndrome is maybe aggravating or triggering a genetic predisposition? I don't think we know enough about it. But to say that tens of thousands of parents that report the same thing, a seizure within a day or two of getting the vaccine, and sometimes death, and sometimes a regression of development, I mean, kids, a large number of kids becoming nonverbal, I don't think that we can ignore that. And yeah, maybe there are other things. All Andy Wakefield said was, this should be studied. And his study was peer-reviewed, to reference Nick's comment again. His study was peer-reviewed and published for 10 years before they went back and said, wait a minute. And they deplatformed him, they stripped him of his license, and they retracted the study. But for a decade, the study was peer-reviewed and nobody had a problem with it. So, there's a question of whether that was a political move or if they came up with some new science that says, no, not only was and he wasn't even the clinician. He was taking clinical data from accredited clinics around the world, 30-something accredited clinics. He took their data, he analyzed their data and said, okay, this is what I see. It looks like there might be a link here. We should study this link. And if we don't study this link, it's irresponsible. And we're complicit in injuring these children that are having these seizures and then regressing because of it. So I don't think that that's necessarily like the same thing. I don't think Wakefield was saying vaccines cause autism, but again, popular culture creates this meme and then it goes viral, and kind of the mob mentality takes over and they blast any nuance from the discussion.
So same kind of topic question to you, this time in the form of a comment from Gab G, Isaac. She said, he or she, I don't know. It's a genderless name. It's not a fallacy. Moms know. My kid was fine. He got shots. He changed. It's cause effect, not correlation does not equal causation. Isaac, what do you say to that?
Well, first off, I want to compliment Danny's nuance, because that is a remarkably reasonable position for someone in his camp to have. So I definitely appreciate being able to look beyond some of the more popular sentiments. So in terms of that question, that's a great point on why anecdotes aren't reliable. So literally the most unreliable form of evidence in science. And this is why. My uncle smoked for 30 years and he did not get cancer. He's totally healthy, works out still even, every morning. Should I smoke? I mean, my uncle didn't die from cancer. So I have a direct experience with cigarettes not leading to harm and death. But what does the evidence show? Well, the evidence shows that if you smoke, you're more likely to get cancer and you're more likely to die and be unhealthy. So even though I have one example of that not applying, then that doesn't mean that generalizes to the rest of the population. It's known as external validity, and anecdotes have remarkably little, if any at all. So that's something to take into consideration. And also, vaccination timeframes correlate with the development and onset of some of the neurological deficiencies that people who believe the correlation exists from vaccines. I mean, you have millions of people getting vaccinated around this critical time frame of development. So if vaccines were 100% safe, 100% safe and effective, which they're not, but if they were, you would still see this happening. And if you didn't, that would be strange because people are going to make correlations that aren't there. So it's just not sufficient evidence. And if it was, then I would be a smoker right now because of my uncle, and I'm not.
Well, when does anecdotes become statistics? One person reporting that their child has a seizure after MMR is an anecdote. Tens of thousands of parents reporting the exact same scenario. At what point does it become a statistic?
It's a great question. And you have to look at coordinated studies. Vaccines, as a very contrary to popular belief, vaccines are tested in larger numbers of children for longer periods of time than drugs are. No medication receives this level of scrutiny. And that's because healthy people are getting it. Healthy people are getting vaccinated. So you have to make sure that they're safe. So you have the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, VAERS, and the Vaccine Safety Data Link Project, which are model systems for detecting rare adverse events. And drug surveillance systems would benefit if they mimicked these systems. So vaccines have these remarkable systems to be able to detect strange anomalies that occur in terms of adverse reactions. And that's where you need to be looking. You need to be looking at where the data and evidence would show a correlation based on an objective analysis that takes emotions out of the equation. Because if somebody's child is harmed and they don't know why, they're going to want to attribute that harm to something that they think that they can conceptualize and understand, and that's reasonable. And I'm not even saying they're wrong all the time. Sometimes they might be right. But even if they were injured from a vaccine, does that mean nobody should get a vaccine anymore, considering the benefits that they objectively have?
If those people fear getting vaccines and they decide not to, then no, they shouldn't get vaccines.
Well, just because you fear something doesn't mean it's not good for you. You can be afraid of something that would benefit you were you to overcome your fear and to be brave and to do it regardless. So I'm not saying that it should all be within their own volition, but it could still benefit them without their knowledge, even if they are afraid of it.
I'm looking for the statistic because you said something just now about vaccines being, I'm looking through my discovery, about vaccines being tested longer and on a greater sample size than drugs are. I'm looking for the link.
Oh, let's see. I've got that in there.
I read that the MMR specifically was tested on 2,500. And so if the adverse reactions was 1 in 10,000, that's not enough data to be able to come up with it's not a big enough sample size to even create one adverse reaction, right? So how could that be a big enough sample size?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, that's because those are preclinical trials looking for rare adverse events that would be detected at those. I mean, they're still big samples. So if there's a huge effect from the vaccine, you would find it.
If they're rare adverse events and you're saying it was 1 in 10,000, how could the sample size be less than 10,000 if they're looking for that rare event? They're not going to find any if they only test 2,500.
Well, that's why we have VAERS and passive reporting systems that monitor vaccine adverse events after they are approved for licensure. So that's where they're found after they've already been approved. And you see, oh, well, we didn't find anything preclinically. Looks like there's something in VAERS. Maybe it's 1 in 10,000, still pretty low. Looks like the vaccine is still worth it. So the citation is at the end of 1 in my thing for vaccines are safe. Vaccines are tested more than other drugs. That's where you'll find that one. So it's important to keep these into consideration, because when you look at it at an individual level, it really seems like they are worth the benefits. And MMR, for example, it goes beyond preventing death from the measles, because if you get measles, there's a period about 3 years of immunosuppression where your immune system is weakened because you had to fight off the measles infection. And for the next 3 years, you're more vulnerable to death from infectious diseases. But if you get the MMR, you never get measles. You're not open for 3 years where you could be more likely to die from a different susceptible disease. So there are additional benefits to the MMR vaccine beyond preventing even measles.
So one of our viewers, it was my fault he didn't get his question answered, because when I asked you, Isaac, I tacked on a bunch of other shit that distracted you. So let me ask it directly. How many deaths have been associated with measles in the United States? He only asks because he says the number is highly debated.
I don't think it's debated. I'm pretty sure it's like zero at least within the few recent years. No one has died from the measles because of the efficacy of immunization programs within the United States. So it's more reason to vaccinate.
All right. And Michelle Imbergia asks, is there a correlation between vaccines and the end of disease? Let me ask that to Danny first.
I don't think that there is a such thing as an end to disease. I think diseases can wax and wane, and vaccines may, in fact, play a part in that. As I've said, I'm not saying that vaccines are completely ineffective. I think that wild immunity is much more effective and much safer. So, that's really my argument.
So I want to talk. Oh, Isaac, do you want to respond to that?
Well, it just depends on the disease. If it's smallpox, and that was virtually eliminated by immunization. If it's measles, almost. If it's something like the flu, then you have way more room for debate. So it depends.
So I want to talk about something that Danny brought up, which is crony capitalism, perverted scientific data, the conflicts of interest and all this stuff. Let me start with Danny by saying, what science do you trust? Because it sounds like you pretty much doubt most everything. And if I'm wrong, please tell me. But where do you get your truth from? This goes back to your process of determining your position. What do you consider truthful and rational, and what do you call on when you want to find out good statistical scientific studies on this stuff?
I think I know this is not going to be a satisfactory answer to a lot of this audience, but I think intuition. I think that, as I said before, my belief system in erring on the side of nature over man, I think a lot of science is just arrogance. We think we know something until we don't. Doctors were promoting cigarette use in the 40s, and then, by the way, cigarettes cause cancer. Thalidomide. I mean, we can go through a history of settled science until it wasn't settled anymore. So a lot of these studies are not being done. I mean, Isaac, correct me if I'm wrong. Has there ever been a study on children who were vaccinated up to full schedule and compared them to unvaccinated children?
Before we go to Isaac, let me just stick on your intuition point here. Is intuition a valid method of determining truth?
Yeah, I think it can be. For me, it is. I have to take everything with a grain of salt, right? So if there's data coming out of the CDC, do I think all the data coming out of the CDC is wrong? No, I have to measure it against my belief system ultimately. Look, as I said before, science is a religion. It's a belief system. There is evidence that appears to be empirical until it's not. Thalidomide was safe and appeared to be safe to be put to market until the evidence came back years later that, it's not safe. Now we have new information. So if the studies are done, if you take a population of unvaccinated kids and through their life, you test them as they get older until they're, let's say, 20, 25 years old, they're fully adults, and compare that with a vaccinated group, are we going to see that the unvaccinated group is healthier? I mean, I would guess we probably would see that because just based on evolutionary science. So there's something that I guess I trust, the idea that evolution is survival of the most adaptable. So those who can adapt and defeat these diseases by adaptability will survive, and those who can't won't.
Well, let me keep. Go ahead.
Society with this, what I call synthetic life support, where you've got all these people that without vaccines, where would they be? Their bodies don't know how to respond anymore to natural diseases. They have to rely on drugs to keep them alive. And I see that argument a lot. Well, we live longer than we ever have before. Yeah, well, we also take a lot of drugs. The hundreds of people in Afghanistan have no contact with the outside world. They don't use drugs. They all they use is plant medicine, and they live into the hundreds. So, I mean, that's evidence, that to me seems like empirical evidence that their lifestyle they're able to maintain homeostasis, and they have evolved to be very resistant to disease. Do I think that they live in some kind of sterile bubble with no pathogens? I doubt it.
So the intuition thing is really bothering me. So like if
I knew it would.
well, I mean, it's let me ask it in the form of a question. So like what data or process is there? What's the null hypothesis for your intuition? What process would cause your intuition to change? And if you woke up tomorrow and your intuition said that vaccines were more than safe enough, like, would that change your position? And, you know, what is this intuition machine, and how is it objective, I guess?
I don't want to get too religious about it, but yeah, I mean, I get that it's a hard thing to accept as an answer, right? I think that, look, if the CDC says it's good to breathe oxygen, I know, yeah, you're right. I agree with that. It's good to breathe oxygen. When the CDC says it's perfectly safe to inject thimerosal past all your natural filtration defenses that you've evolved to have, you know, our skin is a filter. Our nose hairs filter out. Our digestive system, things that we ingest, right? When you inject directly into the muscle or directly into bloodstream, you're bypassing that. And I get that scientists think it's okay, this is safe. I've had this argument about GMO foods with my dad. My dad has a 40-year-old biology degree from when he was in college and doesn't think the science has changed since then. So he's like, no, there's nothing wrong with GMO foods. They're exactly the same except they're engineering pesticides into it. How can we believe? Does that seem rational? I have not studied this in depth, but I don't think it seems rational to say that foods that evolved naturally over millions of years are going to be the same as foods that were genetically manipulated to have pesticides grown into them, and that's not going to have any effect on our biology. So that's where my intuition comes in, right? I'm going to err on the side of nature before I trust a system, a crony capitalist system that, you know, it can't be trusted, and even when it can be trusted, is subject to error.
So back to Isaac, there is no industry. There is no industry as manipulated, controlled, perverted, regulated at every single level. Like we were just talking about this on a stream yesterday on Disenthrall. There is no level of the medical industry that is not controlled and licensed and perverted by political interests and controls than the medical industry. So how can anyone trust anything coming out of that industry when so much of it is perverted and is a conflict of interest?
All right. I will start by answering your question and then go into some of the things that Danny brought up. So I don't trust the government either. But the difference with vaccines is the scientific community and independent researchers who verify them, they're not all in the government. There's the whole world and all of their governments and all of their independent researchers, which there is independent research on vaccines. They would all have to be colluding. It's too much of a stretch. And here's why government has an interest in vaccines. If your constituents are dead, you cannot control anyone, right? So you want to have cattle to herd. So that's a reasonable position. So I think this is maybe an argument specialized to Danny, but maybe it will generalize to others too. Science and medicine are not entirely in bed with one another. Science and the government, medicine and government, they're not entirely alike. Think about psychedelics. Psychedelics, the whole scientific and medical community are basically like, yo, psychedelics should be legal and they're really good for you and they can cure a lot of messed up stuff. And the government's like, oh, no, we don't want psychedelics. We want to, restrict your ability to access your own consciousness. So we're going to make that illegal. There's a disconnect there. There's a divide between what science is saying and what the government is saying. And just because they happen to agree on the notion that immunizations are effective doesn't inherently mean that they're not, just because the state is saying something. They have a different interest in mind. So you have to think about how science and medicine are separated from the state and government when you want to make an argument about how they could be connected. So that's why I would say independent research. Millions of vaccines are given every day, not every day, but over a period of a month without incidents. So all of this stuff is important to consider. So that's the answer to your question, Patrick. But Danny brought up vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies, and I'm glad he did, because there has been a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study, and 3 children died from infectious diseases, and 11 had non-fatal case of the measles. So last time we did a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study, when a few of the unvaccinated group died from infectious diseases, we thought, well, maybe this isn't a great idea. So that's also in my discovery. So it's like a bulletproof vest. So think about this. So if there's a new bulletproof vest that comes out, let's say you run a private security firm, right? And all your guys have these good bulletproof vests, and there's a new one. Do you send out one guy without a vest and one guy with the new vest to see if the new vest works better? No, you use the old vest compared to the new vest and see if the new vest works better than the old vest, because there's no reason to expose somebody to harm when you know that you can protect them from it. And the same is true with immunizations. If we can vaccinate somebody and prevent an infectious disease from harming them, if we don't do that, we are guilty of medical negligence. And that is the case with the United States syphilis study, where it's ironic because anti-vaxxers will cite this a lot. We gave syphilis, African Americans were infected with syphilis, and we had treatment for it, and we didn't give it to them. And we just saw, let's see what happens. That's allowing someone to be exposed to harm, and it's wrong. So that's why vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies aren't done, and it's completely reasonable. So you could say something on that if you want to. I feel like I should hold the next topic for maybe your response.
Let me jump in here real quick. I think it was an excellent point made. Like farmers currently vaccinate their cows, their livestock, because they want them to be healthy, not because they're benevolent, not because they're not. Like if cows were humans and deserved rights or whatever, that would be an evil thing to do, to force vaccinate their population of cows. But but nevertheless, that would be the government's motive in this case. If the government is evil, they would want us healthy so that they could farm us for our productivity for as long as possible. What do you say to that? I mean, we have some questions queued up, so I want to jump back in here in a minute, but go ahead, Danny.
All right. Well, first, I think the bulletproof vest analogy is a terrible analogy because it makes the assumption that either vaccines or you're going to get shot, right? I mean, that's not, you're not going to die from disease just because you're not vaccinated, right? So my son is not vaccinated. He's 9 years old. He's never even been seriously ill. And I've had him tested for titers, and he does have some titers to a lot of these diseases, which means he's been exposed. Now, the pediatrician was not thrilled with the level of his titers. It wasn't the same level as if he would have been vaccinated. But that tells me the fact that he has titers at all, he's come into contact with some of these pathogens, and he's developed at least some immunity to them. That aside, I think the bulletproof vest analogy, I understand why they use that analogy and why they feel like it's immoral. I ran into the same thing shooting my documentary about cannabis and cancer. You can't design a trial where the chemotherapy has a 30% efficacy rate, and cannabis, there's no proven efficacy rate. So you can't design a trial. It's against ethical regulations to design a trial where X amount of people take chemo and X amount of people take cannabis, and you see the results, because as you said, it's immoral to deny people. But I mean, I don't see why somebody couldn't voluntarily sign up for that. I would sign up for that. If I got cancer, I would treat it with cannabis. I've seen enough of the research. There is enough research that does, I guess, coincide with my worldview and does prove. See, to me, that's what real science is, right? It's examining nature and trying to figure out how nature works. And so if the science is confirming, okay, we evolved to have an immune system, and as long as we maintain homeostasis, our immune system, and does that protect everyone? No, I mean, maybe there are going to be diseases that come along, and and wipe us out and, add some balance back to the planet. I don't know. I don't want to sound like a eugenicist, but I think that leads us into that that kind of philosophy that we know that they have. You guys are talking about, they want to keep the tax slaves healthy so we can continue to produce, pay taxes. But that's not really true. Look at Bill Gates. He has openly said there are too many people. There are people in the ruling class that absolutely believe there are too many people and we need to wipe some people out. So I don't think necessarily it's about they want to keep people healthy. I think there's a great argument to be made about the fact that you want to keep people buying pharmaceutical products. And what better a residual income product than vaccines? Vaccines are generally not purchased by the end user. They're purchased by governments and then distributed all over the world. Those are huge, sweetheart, crony capitalist contracts. So we can't, and yes, I agree that all science is not intertwined with the government in terms of them having the same goals, but government regulates all science. Government regulates all trials. Government regulates funding for research. There's a very small percentage of research that's done without government funding, but all research is done with government regulation. So whether the scientists want to have integrity in the scientific method or not, sometimes their projects are going to get shut down. And it's not a matter of scientists colluding with each other. I think there's also confirmation bias in their industry, right? And there is political and peer pressure. So if you're going to have Wakefield, his study gets peer reviewed and his peers say, okay, yeah, this is cool. And they publish it in a prestigious establishment medical journal. And for 10 years, there's no problem with this study. Then all of a sudden, 10 years later, the anti-vax movement picks up steam. And all of a sudden now, there was fraud. He's a liar. He's a criminal. Strip him of his life. This was clearly a political hit. So there's no denying that politics plays a role in it. There is no such thing as pure science, even if the scientists themselves are pure. They're pure of heart. They have integrity. You can't separate those things.
So I want to go to Isaac with something that he pointed out to challenge him, that the Unvax versus Vax study looked at 25 kids in Nigeria, saying that that's probably not good science. What do you have to say for that? Are you muted? Did I do that? God, I'm terrible. Start over, please.
It's not 100 or 1,000 people, right? So I understand that. And the problem is that was one of the first studies that were done in that, and it went so badly that people were like, well, we don't really want to repeat this study. We don't want to do a bigger sample of this study if it's going to expose more people to harm. And so since the efficacy and safety of vaccines is tested in other ways, there's no benefit from that kind of study when it has the potential to generate that much of a negative outcome. So that's the answer to that. What Danny said about depopulation, I'm glad he brought it up, because it's a common misconception, and it's like condoms. Vaccines are like a condom for society, and here's how that makes sense. So vaccines inhibit future population growth. They don't destroy the current population. So in that sense, they're like a condom. Here's how. Think of Africa, right? Model Africa in this visual image. You have parents who have to have like 10 kids, hoping that 5 will live. But with vaccines, you can have 3 kids because they'll all survive. So you can more efficiently support a smaller family size so that you don't have to have a bunch of kids that you can't take care of. So that's how vaccines help with depopulation, because they help curb rapid spikes in population growth that would lead to very poor living conditions in places where infectious diseases are more rampant, like places in Africa. And in terms of money, like vaccines being profitable, between 1980 and 1986, there were many claims about vaccine injury brought to the civil tort system. And a lot of people weren't paid because it was hard to win claims of vaccine injury. And so the anti-vaccine group at the time, Dissatisfied Parents Together was the group. they helped draft the Vaccine Act to make vaccine court a thing because they pay for your lawyer fees. So even if you lose, they pay for your lawyer fees, and there's a lower burden of proof. So it's easier to win and claim a vaccine injury. And there's like a few thousand cases, and the rewards are huge. They're like $250,000 each. So that's why it's $4 billion over 30 years, which people will cite often. So the vaccine manufacturers almost stopped making vaccines because they were so not profitable, which is why Vaccine Court was created, so that the state would incur some of the costs associated with vaccine damage claims, even though they lowered the burden of proof, so that manufacturers wouldn't pull out and stop making vaccines. And so they're so not profitable that they almost stopped making them. And that's why we have Vaccine Court on the account of anti-vaccine groups at the time. They asked for it. And now is evidence of government collusion and big pharma. You can't sue the manufacturers. It's big pharma now, when actually they wanted that in the first place. It's extremely ironic, honestly.
I mean, what it sounds like to me is that, and whether this vaccine group was misguided or not, it sounds like what they did was take away the free market aspect, right? So now vaccine companies don't have to worry about it. There's this, they pay a portion of their of their profits into this compensation fund. And it's like, yeah, the government will the VAERS court will deal with it. They'll pay people off, and we don't have to worry about lawsuits anymore.
So, best comment of the stream, I want to highlight this. Award goes to the Salt Lakers. Vaccines cause arguments. It's like, that's it, man. 10 out of 10. You win best comment of the stream. Okay, so I want to take on something myself, and I think both of you will agree with my position on this. This is another thing that I hear constantly when I see this discussion going on, and both of you will, of course, get a chance to say if you disagree. But it's on the legal immunity granted by government through the vaccine court, and people are rightfully suspicious when the government uses forcibly protects people from legal challenges and payouts based on damage done, right? The vaccine industry is one of a very few industries where the government uses its guns and its power and its monopoly on force to prevent people from being able to sue the hell out of somebody and get a massive monetary, award when the company hurts somebody. And so that makes people suspicious of vaccines. And I can totally understand why that would make you suspicious of vaccines. However, it doesn't have bearing on the actual statistics and of the damage behind vaccines. I don't think that's a valid argument. The reason why government does that is because government is evil. And I don't think anyone here disagrees with me on that. Like, government does evil things, like protecting industries it wants to protect. It does that in other areas as well, and it's bad and it's wrong and it shouldn't be done. What do you guys have to say on that? I'll start with you, Danny. Do you have any disagreements?
I don't think necessarily because VAERS pays out settlements that's not science, that's politics. So, whether it's hush money or it's legitimate compensation for legitimate injuries, it's hard to say. And I think maybe there's probably a little bit of both. There could be fraud. I know some lawyers who like to pretend that their clients fell at a McDonald's so they can sue McDonald's and get a nice payoff. That could be happening. I have no doubt that there are people that would do that. On the other hand, I'm sure that there are a lot of, and they may get paid hush money. And I think that there are legitimate injuries, and people, instead of being able to go directly at the product manufacturer, we're given this it's like being thrown some crumbs from the table, because ultimately what happens is it insulates the corporation from dealing with the liability of an injury that they caused. I think that the kind of rationale is, right, that, well, this is not an exact science, and yes, people get injured, so we can't have the vaccine companies go out of business because, a couple of people who have weird biologies that we can't explain why they get injured, sue them, and then they decide to stop making vaccines, right? It's always the collectivist argument that it's better to protect the herd than worry about the one sheep. And for me, and I think for anarchists in general, it's based on individualist philosophy. We should be focused on, if it injures one person, then this is something we need to look at. And as I said, if you want to take vaccines, I have no problem with you taking vaccines. But I don't think that I should be shamed, or maybe that is the anarchist answer, right? Ostracization. Maybe we set up two anarchist communities, the pro-vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers. This could be the clinical trial that can't get approved, right? The unvaccinated anarchists versus the vaccinated anarchists, and we'll see who survives longer.
All right, Isaac.
That's a great idea.
Go ahead and respond to that if you want, and then I'm going to crack us back on track because we have about 30 minutes left. So,
okay, great. Well, vaccine court is complicated, and I understand the sentiment that vaccine manufacturers aren't exposed to liability, so maybe they don't have an incentive to make a safe product. Although if your product kills everyone it touches, then no one's going to buy it. So that's something to consider. You have some kind of reason to make at least semi-safe product, but yeah, you're not going to sell anything, even in a market that's protected. So yes, you can actually sue a vaccine manufacturer, but you have to bring it to vaccine court first. That's the rule. And I'm totally for making vaccines open to a free market and taking away that level of protection. Although what I think would result is there would be so many litigations brought to vaccine manufacturers that they would probably just stop making vaccines again. And then it would, because there are so many anti-vaxxers who would do that. And even though it's harder to win in civil court, that was the problem initially, which is why the Vaccine Act was produced in the first place. So there would probably be an interesting, in my opinion, free market compromise to incentivize vaccine production in a way that wouldn't be litigated against so dramatically. I'm not sure what the agorist solution would be, but I would be curious to see it and watch it unfold. And maybe it would fix some problems that vaccines currently have. Because I'm not saying vaccines don't have issues, and there's room there's room in the conversation to make vaccines better and make them even safer than they are. But if you want to have an honest conversation, you have to take into consideration the positive effects of vaccines and the negative effects. And it's always one or the other. It's always vaccines are terrible and not worth it, or they're the best thing ever and they never do any harm. And you have to be able to see the nuances that exist in both perspectives to be able to find a real solution.
So I have a couple comments, and then I want to bring us back to our proposition because we have about 32 minutes left. One of the comments on the vaccine court thing is that it is the government attempting to solve a government-created problem. So in a free society, you could have a contract or an agreement that you signed when you took the vaccination that released them of liability, and that would actually function. So if you chose to take a vaccination and you signed the release of liability, then you couldn't, in a free society, then go back and rightfully sue them and get awarded massive amounts of damages. Unlike now, where if you sign liability waivers in this current court system and you're still injured, the court system still allows you, in spite of that agreement, to sue the pants off of a company and get massive damages awarded. So in a free society, this could kind of go away. The people that wanted their vaccines would be able to do so, but they would also in the process release the companies of their liability from the damages, and then actual science and actual statistics and actual review and accountability organizations would be able to have sway. Unlike now, where the government creates a system where you can still sue the hell out of somebody whether or not you sign a waiver, and then they have to go and fix that government created problem by sequestering them behind a government monopolized protection court for the industry. So that's what I wanted to say on that.
That's a good solution.
Any 10-second comments on that from either of you?
No, I think that I would be interested to see how that plays out.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement.
Cool. Okay, so let's get back to our premise with the time remaining. And I think a good way of doing this would be to say, okay, Isaac, I want you to talk to your friend Danny here, and I want you to tell him, I think you need to get vaccinated, and I think the risks outweigh the benefits outweigh the risks, and here's why. Let's sort of bring this to a head and kind of start positioning ourselves for closing discussion here.
Well, we have to. There's one topic that has not been hit yet, and it needs to be addressed appropriately, and that is the ingredients in vaccines. And that is probably one of the biggest fears of vaccines, that they have toxic ingredients that don't need to be there. So Danny mentioned mercury, thimerosal, which has been removed from all childhood vaccines and is only in a few, like the flu shot at this point. It could still be removed because it's only a preservative, so we could find a substitute reasonably. It's only there to save money, so we should take that out. Fair enough. I can concede to that point, but that's not in the childhood vaccines anymore, so we can leave that one aside. But formaldehyde, aluminum, those kinds of things, the adjuvants. So I want to ask Danny, why are adjuvants in vaccines, and what would you propose as an alternative if we were to remove them?
From my understanding, adjuvants sort of amplify. So if I understand correctly, they are using a minute amount of the virus or whatever it is, the disease that they're vaccinating for, right? So the adjuvants kind of amplify the response. So that they don't have to put as many, it's to save money, basically. It's to not have to put as much of the disease into the vaccine, if I understand that correctly. And I guess you can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, that's right. The antigen is the dead virus that they put in, or the weakened virus is the antigen, and the adjuvant is the something like aluminum that enhances the immune response. Because if you just inject an antigen, like let's say you just inject a dead measles virus, it's dead. The immune system's like, well, it's already dead. Great. Well, no work to be done here. There's not going to generate antibodies and recognize it and reproduce, an immune response that can be ready for later. So the adjuvant, like aluminum, is tied to the antigen. And so you have a dead measles virus along with aluminum, and the aluminum is like, they're like, what the fuck is this doing here? So they go and they see it's measles, and then they create antibodies to be able to lead to future resistance. So that's why the adjuvant is there. Otherwise, the antigen or the dead virus would, there would be no point in injecting it.
So what I would say is to remove aluminum and replace it with essential oils. No, I'm kidding. I'm being.
Do those generate
But actually, I'm not, because I would say don't take a vaccine, but just make sure you're eating healthy, and you'll achieve homeostasis, and your immune will be good.
Great. So you admit that there's a real reason why adjuvants need to be incorporated into the vaccine's production, and you can't just remove an adjuvant like aluminum and have a vaccine that works.
Oh, I didn't say that. I don't know that that's the case. I'm not a vaccine scientist, so I don't know. All I'm telling you is that wild immunity is much more effective than vaccines to begin with. So why would I take a vaccine?
Because vaccine pose a far less risk of death statistically and serious complication. That's way more likely with a, getting the chicken pox or getting the measles. It's more dangerous. So aluminum. Well, it's not what the data supports, but let's just go into aluminum or formaldehyde. And so these ingredients, let's say they are toxic, right? Which I'm saying to a certain degree they are, because they stimulate the immune response. Aluminum is commonly viewed as a neurotoxin, and so injecting any level of it must just be terrible for the human body, right? That's the position. However, the level of aluminum already present in an infant's bloodstream, same with formaldehyde, is 100 times higher before any exposure to vaccines. So you have a few micrograms in a vaccine, and you have a few milligrams already circulating the bloodstream because, for example, formaldehyde plays a role in DNA synthesis. So at a cellular level, it's important. So you have way more of these adjuvants already present in the bloodstream than is in any vaccine. So how is injecting a little bit of aluminum when you already have way more already circulating through your system going to lead to an effect like autism or like some kind of serious common complication that vaccines are claimed to cause but aren't scientifically supported?
Where are they saying that the aluminum that's already present is coming from?
The aluminum comes from, it's already in your system. So it's just like, like saying, where's the blood come from? Where did red blood cells come from when you're born? Where do they come from? They're developed over time in the womb.
So our biology creates aluminum in our system?
Formaldehyde is the one that is important for cellular function and at a cellular level. So that's formaldehyde. Aluminum normally comes from the environment. So like breast milk, but that's after you're born. From the placenta inside the womb, from exposure, it's breathing the air.
So it's aluminum transferred from the mother.
Yeah, but basically, because it's an environmental toxin. It's in the air. It's in food. It's in pretty much everything. Okay. Not everything, but it's around.
Did we evolve to inject ourselves with aluminum?
Well, did we evolve to do anything scientific? Those are intelligent evolutions that have occurred in the realm of consciousness and not in the realm of individual biology. This is a conceptualization that comes from the intellect of the human race being able to adapt to environmental threats in a way that is reasonable. So aluminum.
Hold on. This is an appeal to evolution. Like, we evolved to live like 30 to 35 years, but through scientific advancements, we now live 90 to 100 on average. So, I mean, that's not natural either. I don't know. Can you maybe back that up? Go ahead.
I don't know if it's true that we evolved to only live 35 years. That I can't say. I can't comment to that. We may or may not have evolved to inject ourselves with aluminum. I'm going to err on the side of nature and say, no, I don't think it's a good idea to inject yourself with aluminum. Yeah, I get that there are environmental toxins all around us, and that's bad too. I think it's probably not a great thing that mothers are passing along aluminum, most likely because they're not healthy. They're not chelating heavy metals and toxins out of their bodies, and so they're passing it on to their children, and that leaves those kids at a disadvantage. I think that's a bad thing, but I don't think we should compound that by intentionally injecting more pollutants that we did not evolve to inject. It's like saying, we probably have, when I take a shower, I'm probably inhaling some of the chlorine and the other things that are put into municipal water. It's still a diluted bleach solution. I'm not going to intentionally, on top of inhaling some of it in the shower, then also drink diluted bleach solution, because even if it's diluted, it's still bleach, right? It's not going to be good for me. And my body, it provides my body may be able to recover from a lot of these environmental toxins, and a healthy person, I believe, does. We do chelate out toxins. That's part of our natural. What's the word? To get rid of toxins. It's part of it's a natural part of homeostasis, right? Is getting rid of toxins, taking in nutrients to stay at homeostasis, to stay healthy. So yeah, I think that just because we may inherit stuff from our parents when we're born, that doesn't mean we should intentionally compound that. I mean, I get that you're saying, well, the risk is not worth the benefit. But to me, I still maintain that the benefit comes from coming into contact with the pathogens, naturally getting immunity without having to have all these other added problems. Look, the side effects are there. You can say that, oh, well, the vaccine inserts, anything that anyone in the trial had has to go on the insert. Okay, so maybe not every single thing on the insert is a danger, but there are side effects. The vaccine scientists don't pretend or say that there aren't side effects. They don't claim that immunity is forever. They openly admit that wild immunity is better. But again, it's like a shortcut. We can't trust people to eat healthy, to maintain homeostasis. So we'll create this product as a shortcut. And I just think a more natural path is what we evolved it's the path we evolved to take.
Maybe it is the path we evolved to take, but that doesn't mean it's actually the best path. There actually is a more optimized route that we can take as a species that leads to an individual and a collective benefit for everyone involved, all parties. So drinking bleach, even if you already have bleach in your system, sure, don't do it. Drinking bleach has no benefit to you. But a vaccine does, because it creates instantaneous antibodies for a dangerous disease that could later infect and harm you. So that's why it needs to be a toxin. That's why it needs to be something like aluminum, because it needs to trigger an immune response. Otherwise, it's pointless to inject the antigen to begin with into your muscle. So the fact that there's so much more present, it can't actually harm you to the degree where any reasonable claim of harm is even close to the actualized benefit.
But what you're doing is dismissing the experience of tens of thousands of parents who their children did experience harm. And what was I going to say about the deleted bleach? According to government and a large portion of science, drinking deleted bleach is good for you because it's supposedly cleaning the water. So, and I'm called a conspiracy theorist, thinking deleted bleach is not healthy to drink, right? So that's not actually true.
You're saying deleted? Did you mean diluted? I just want to make sure I understand. Okay, I just want to make sure there wasn't a different kind of bleach. Okay,
that's a good point. It's like fluoride, right? Yeah, right. It's like kind of like the same thing. So
it's actually a euphemism for a cocktail in New York City, at least. I've looked at the water reports, and fluoridated water is actually a euphemism for a cocktail of over 300 chemicals that are put into the municipal water system to keep us healthy, and of course, make my teeth whiter.
Last call. I want to put out a last call for questions and stuff to the audience, and I would also like you guys to also put in the comments, because I'm seeing a lot of people go back and forth, and I'm seeing nobody with open minds, and I was really hoping that this would be a little bit different. And I want to ask you guys to post in the comments right now, and I'll read them if I can, if they're good. What would change your mind in either direction? What is your null hypothesis? What would it take? What mechanism, what process would it take that would make you maybe not even flip completely? I don't even care about that. I want to know what it would take to reduce your confidence in your current position. Post that in the comments, please. We'll read it. So, guys, we have about a little over 15 minutes left, and we'll probably have some comments and questions coming in here shortly. So maybe let's start to wrap it up. Maybe make your final case at this point. We'll go ahead and call this maybe the closing phase of this. So we'll start with Danny. Give us your position after the debate. Have you learned anything? Has your confidence been decreased from your position in any way? And if so, why? If not, why not?
Sure. And, I just want to ask Isaac a quick question before we get to that. Isaac, will you be taking the COVID vaccine when it comes out?
Actually, it's a good thing you asked that. I have some problems with the development of the COVID-19 vaccine. They skipped animal trials, and bad things happen when you rush things. So I am a little skeptical of the accelerated development of that vaccine, and I have my cautions open to seeing how it goes in clinical trials. I'm definitely not just going to get it once they say it's done without doing a thorough investigation.
All right, good. Fair enough. So have I learned anything? I feel like I've heard most of these arguments for the past 10 years. I've been having this discussion. I like Isaac. I respect him. He's clearly well researched. I see that. I think he's a lot less cynical than I am, and maybe that's because of my age. Or I think I'm a lot less inclined to trust what the medical establishment, what the scientific community, which also has an establishment component, and what the ruling class describes as settled science around vaccines. I would call it a healthy skepticism. I have definitely been criticized for not vaccinating my son. If he decided, like your brother or you decided when he was old enough that he decided he wanted to get vaccinated, I would be disappointed, but I don't think that I would necessarily try to talk him out of it, or, I certainly wouldn't let it develop into a conflict between us, where I would move to another state over it. I'm sorry to hear that about your mom. I mean, I hope that doesn't mean that you guys aren't in contact, or if it was more hopefully it was more from the media circus that came up out of it, rather than a conflict between you guys, because that would be a terrible thing for, a family to break up over that. My dad is very pro-vaccine and very pro-allopathic medicine, and we have these debates and arguments at Sunday dinner where we're screaming at each other. So, I would never want to see it get to that point, though. I kind of lost my train of thought there.
So has your confidence been reduced to any degree in your position? And if so, why not?
Oh, right. That's what I was saying. So my trust in what people call science is not. No, I don't feel like my confidence in what I see as natural evolution has been decreased. I feel like I will probably always err on that side, because I trust nature more than I trust humans. I think even if we are well-intentioned, we're subject to error, we're subject to our own biases, we're subject to our own arrogance. And I think that it's very clear in the scientific community, there tends to be a lot of arrogance. And I think it's also interesting to note that the majority of anti-vaxxers are Ivy League educated white people. This is the majority of anti-vaxxers. So wealthier people who are well-educated by establishment standards. And yet these are the same people, the same class of people that are telling us that it's necessary for us all to take vaccines, even to the point of, the legislative wave is moving very quickly, especially in the light of COVID, towards mandatory vaccination. So I find it a bit ironic that basically the same group, the same class of people doesn't vaccinate, like Bill Gates has not vaccinated, and but also is demanding that we be vaccinated mandatorily. So I think I'm going to continue to err on the side of nature. I'm going to continue to nourish my body and maintain homeostasis so that my immune system functions optimally.
Okay, to Isaac, same basic closing questions. Have you learned anything? Has your confidence in your position been reduced? If not, why not? And what would it take? And then any other closing thoughts that you have?
Kinds of conversations are possible. You can keep a respective dialogue with somebody who you disagree with on a fundamental level, as long as you incorporate respect and, basic decency and openness. So I'm glad I could have this conversation with Danny, and I encourage other people to have similar conversations with those who don't agree with them, because that's why free speech is so important, because it's the only way that you can develop good ideas and realize if you are holding a bad idea. So you should flex your ability to use free speech to engage in these types of conversations so you can find out if you're right or wrong. And I think this was a good example of how to do that properly, and I'm glad I could do it with him. So I think it went really well. I'm not completely convinced that everyone who is against vaccines is an Ivy League educated individual, but, fair enough. I also think it's important to see what they're educated in. Is it liberal arts or immunology and virology? That's important to be aware of. I also think Danny's very aware of his biases, which is good, but you should be aware of your biases and then try to realize how that heuristic can stray you from truth, because you have a desire to conform new ideas to a predisposed position, not how it's actually intuitive evidence that you're correct. So I feel like being aware of your biases is good, but you want to be aware of them in a way where you can catch yourself straying from objective judgment because of your biases. So I feel like I have learned that these constructive dialogues are effective and occur. As for my position, I still feel pretty firmly about my position, although I appreciate the intellectual retorts that were offered, and I feel like some of them do hold merit on an individual level, and maybe we should have more conversations about vaccine court, for example, or the litigation process, that's open for discussion. But in conclusion, I think, to wrap up my position, medicine is not about finding the perfect solution. It's about finding the best solution. And vaccines aren't perfect, but based off of the available evidence and data, they're the best answer for infectious diseases. And I like what Danny said about being a little cynical. I think that's true, and I don't necessarily think it's the best thing. I think science is in it for truth, right? It's the foundation of science is how to discover truth. And I don't trust the government, but maybe all aspects of our society are not as bad as the state is. And maybe it's possible that the world is a better place than a lot of us think it is. And I don't think love is just going to win in the end. I think love is already winning. So maybe that's why I have my perspective. But yeah.
Okay. I want to start the end. I want to begin the end by thanking my producer, Kason, for keeping a close eye on the comments, for filtering through everything and constantly feeding me questions and good thoughts to prompt these guys with. Thank you again, Kason. He has sent me a bunch of your comments that you guys put in chat about things that would reduce or modify your confidence in whichever position that you hold. And I would like to use the about 9 minutes that we have left to... I'm going to start by talking about them, and then if you guys have any comments, you will be definitely given the opportunity to do so. But I also want to respect our consensual agreement to limit this at 2 hours. So the first thing was that somebody said that they would want to see a live example on a microscopic level of a vaccine interacting with cells. Now, as part of my significant, not insignificant research that I did leading up to this discussion, I contacted 2 doctors, and one of the questions I asked them was, can I see, it's like Pixar, it didn't happen. Is there a mechanism or a method or a tool that I can literally watch how a virus is taken, is disabled or broken or made ineffectual and then introduced into the bloodstream, and can I literally watch on a microscope? I want to see it happen. I don't want to depend on studies. I just want you to show it to me. Show me a video. And one of them said, yes, absolutely. You can see all this on an electron microscope. This is what people have done. You can go and you can literally watch the pieces of this puzzle, the mechanisms, the tiny machines actually function. Now, of course, the immune system is vastly complex. It's got they said 50 some odd different types of cells. So it's not an easy or a quick thing to do, but you can absolutely, with an electron microscope, watch all of this stuff happen. And you can watch the immune system then react to live viruses that were trained on the vaccines. So that part is not in question, at least. Now, that doesn't discuss about the injury, that doesn't, that the injury rates, the risks and all that stuff. But at least to that point, I think there is an answer. You can watch it happen. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Danny, let's start with you, Danny. Did you have anything you wanted to say to that?
No, I'm sure that's true.
All right, Isaac, anything?
I want an admission ticket to watch myself. That sounds like a great show.
Yeah, same. I did a bunch of Googling to try and find somebody that had released those videos, but I couldn't find them. So I'm going to keep looking, because that's kind of important. That's a step one to anything. It's show it to me. Okay, you say It works. Show me it working. Let's see it. Pixar, it didn't happen. Okay. The next thing that I saw a few people with some really answers that hurt my heart. They hurt me. A couple people said there's nothing that could change my position. And I don't even know what their positions are, because I haven't been watching chat close enough to know which side of this debate that they're on. But on either side of the debate, it hurts my heart when people say there's nothing that could change my mind. That should be a problem to you. That should be a blazing red flag in your mind. I don't care which side of this debate you're on. If there's nothing that can change your mind, you cannot know that you have the correct position. I just wanted to say that. I'm sorry, people. We got to try. We have to try to be open to new evidence. Otherwise, we cannot be sure that we have found truth or that we hold truth.
Agreed. The science is never settled. And anyone who says the science is settled is not really respecting the scientific method.
Isaac, any thoughts?
The science is never settled. So you never actually know 100% that vaccines are not worth it, right?
Yeah, I agree. We're probably at 80 or 90%.
Right. You got to be open to new evidence. That's like what we were saying earlier. That's the whole purpose of free speech. It evolves good ideas. And exposes the bad ones, which is why we need to be uncompromising when it comes to full free speech for everyone in any format of what society you want to live in. Luckily, anarchists don't have a problem with that one.
Okay, two more things that came up from the comments in response to my prompt was that it would take something like a study without government involvement to change their mind, or what they would call an independent study. I would point out, I'm gonna mute your mic a second. It's a little noisy. I would point out that because there is no study that I'm aware of that could be done without government involvement right now, that having your standard be something without government involvement leaves you in a place where you cannot nullify your position. Again, you're in and it's a terrible state that we're in with government being involved in everything, but you have still placed yourself in a position that you cannot nullify. There is no way out for your mind. That means that you cannot know whether or not your position is true because you can't challenge it. And I would ask, my brain really hates names. I'm so sorry. I would ask Danny to respond to this because it's against his side.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Let me just finish that. Sorry. Yeah. Just so, like, even a member of the KKK could make a true statement about race. It's a to coke fallacy to say that somebody cannot make a truth claim in an area because they are XYZ adjective. So just because a government is involved does not mean that the thing is necessarily true or false or evil or broken. Truth can exist there. You just have to take it into account. You have to be a little more cautious. What do you have to say, Denny?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I am kind of in that position where, because I have a hard time trusting anything that comes out of government as that it's not tainted, I have to take it with a grain of salt, and I have to use my intuition to kind of parse through it and see what I do agree with and what I don't. So I'm not saying that I automatically don't believe, when Trump says it's good to breathe oxygen, I agree with him, but there are going to be things that I have to weigh, profit motive. And I know ANCAP's got upset with me when I say that because there's nothing wrong with profit. And no, there isn't anything wrong with profit. But in the context of the crony capitalist system where the pharmaceutical industry lobbies government, the regulatory agencies are made up of former pharmaceutical executives. They serve a couple of years in the FDA, and then they go back to the pharmaceutical industry, the revolving door. This is not conspiracy theory. We all know this is true. There's a motive for regulations and then for them to lobby, right? What are the regulatory agencies basically make recommendations to Congress, and then they pass laws based on that. And
we have less than 2 minutes left.
If that's tainted, then, it's very hard to trust what's coming out of there. So yeah, I am kind of in that position where I've almost painted myself into a box that I really can't. But, I am open enough that if something comes out, I believe it. This COVID business is like really hard to parse through. But you know what? My core belief system is that as long as I maintain homeostasis, I'll be safe as I can be. And
okay, let me, sorry to interrupt. We only have a minute left. Unless you guys consent to maybe a 5-minute extension of the video. It's up to you guys. But
yeah, I think going a little bit.
Okay. So let me pitch it to Isaac then, with what you just brought up, Danny, which was the profit thing, and this was another one of the comments in response to my prompt, was that they want to see something without profit involved. And I think that's a terrible idea. Like, profits can produce great goods. Just because profit is being made does not make a thing evil. I mean, it's quite the opposite. As a anarcho-capitalist, like, profit incentivizes great amounts of good in the world. I would cite the hepatitis cure. I think it was hepatitis. I could have the wrong disease, but it was cured by a pharmaceutical company. And this goes in the face of the argument that a lot of people make that these companies are not in it to cure things; they're in it to treat it. Well, they cured hepatitis. They released the cure for it and made billions of dollars by curing something as opposed to treating it. So it's not an open and shut case in that area. Let me hand that to you, Isaac, on those two things, something without government and something without profits.
Well, I would love to see vaccines on the free market. I feel like government does a thing, kind of like with their COVID-19 response. They feel like they have to show that they're important, and so they have the situation covered. So they'll deal with it on their own. And that messes with the free market and how effective things could be. So like with COVID-19, a lot of the people I've been interviewing are against the draconian measures that are being taken place by the state, and rightfully so. The state isn't needed here. We can handle this all on our own voluntarily, but they want to be the powers, they want to show they've got it under control and they're the father state and we can trust them with all of our freedoms. So that's why they're involved in immunizations. And so if they were to just get out of it and we could let the free market handle immunization practices, I feel like the results in vaccines would be a lot better. And maybe that would be a way to move forward with making vaccines more safe and effective. But as it currently stands, they are safe and effective for the most part for individuals and for the groups at large. I'm not saying there is an improvement to be done here, but if we want to improve, we have to know where we are. We have to know where things stand if we want to move forward. And where they stand now, vaccines are worth the risk for most diseases that you would want to get vaccinated against. Although, there's still certainly topics to be had, conversations that we need to be having. And this is why this is a good format. But I would love to see vaccines out of the grasp of the state and see what would happen in a free market. Because I feel like some of the issues that we're having might be solved that way.
All right. Last word, Danny, and then last word, Isaac, and we'll send it out.
I totally agree. I think I would be a lot more inclined to trust science if it was in the context of a free market. But because it isn't, and crony capitalism affects everything it touches, there is a lot of monopolistic control, and so that taints everything. And so but yeah, absolutely. If there was a true free market, I think I would certainly be much more open to science. That's maybe not every company, there may be companies that are putting out garbage products, but I think that would reveal themselves pretty quickly. So yeah, I'm happy to let the free market solve this, the dangers of vaccines.
Yeah, I still want to do the vax, unvaxxed anarchist society thing Danny mentioned earlier. Sounds like a great idea. We'll see what happens. But the last thing I want to bring up, what'd you say?
I said, unfortunately, I'm already vaccinated, so it'll have to be the next generation, I guess.
You're in my group then. We can work on this together.
No, but, we need to bring it together. There's too few of us to be separating over stuff like this.
Right, that's fair too. Well, the last thing I want to say is I feel like I've defended my position adequately, so what I want to offer is some other sources. In terms of independent research, Respectful Insolence is a great source on vaccines and debunking anti-vaccine misinformation, or half-truths, as I like to call them. And there's a group called Vaccine Talk, a forum for pro and anti-vaxxers. And so they have discussions like this, where anti-vaxxers can come, say what they think, and pro-vaxxers can come and say what they think. And then there's respectful dialogue that's enforced, and you have to be nice. That's the only rule. And you can talk about whatever you want with vaccines. So I support that kind of open dialogue exchange. This went really well. I might be starting a show soon called Straight to the Point, which is a vaccine debate show. So we'll see how that goes. Stay tuned for that. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of show some resources that people could use to investigate this more independently. Because you shouldn't take my word for it. You should research this on your own and come to the truth yourself. So those are some tools on how to achieve that on your own.
All right, guys. I want to thank everybody involved in this discussion. I want to thank the participants, the vast majority of which followed the rules, so to speak, and participated without insult. I think we only ended up banning what was it, 11 or 13 people or something like that. So considering the internet, okay, it's like 10%, So, but to the rest of you, thank you for being mature. Thank you for joining us in the actual fight for truth in the world. I really hope that we have, at least if nothing else was done today, we have shown you what it should look like to come together to fight for truth together. We're on the same side when we're fighting for truth. We're not on opposing sides. And when any of us is found to be wrong, we all win and should be happy about that. I want to thank the two participants. Danny, you can find him at sovereignинthecity.com. Isaac, you can find him at truth.com. Thank you both for being willing to come on, from getting out from behind your keyboards and social media and joining us for this debate. Again, thank you to the audience for participating. And thanks for watching Anarchast, guys. I hope you're enjoying sort of where the show is going since Jeff has stepped down and passed it off to me. So, guys, if you have any comments, I will definitely read them. Post them down in the comments. If you have any thoughts on the debate format that we used here today, click on the link for Patrick's debate format. You can actually comment on that document, and I'll check those out if you have any thoughts on how to improve it. So, with that said, ladies and gentlemen, peace, love, and anarchy.